So let me talk a little bit about our mission. We're a neuroscience company, and we use big data to solve a problem that affects all of us. Now, military suicide spiked in July, and we still don't know why. We're losing more soldiers today from ineffective treatments and medication risk than we've lost in battle. So here's a disruptive idea. While we're spending millions of dollars to try and find out why, what if we could spend a fraction of that to reduce depression and PTSD? To get soldiers on the right treatments more quickly? With that one small change, what if we could actually stop it? That's what we announced this year, in partnership with Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, a 2,000 soldier paid randomized clinical trial of our technology, Peer Interactive, starting this fall. If it's as successful as the other 56 studies in our category, we expect military-wide adoption. And at the same time, adoption by consumers and payers who've already approved our technology, like United Healthcare and Optum. Because we know this, medications are the dominant treatment for depression and PTSD, but medications only work about a third of the time. This has been well documented in the media, covered by 60 Minutes, Newsweek.
Dr. Tim Kendall, a practicing psychiatrist and co-director of the commission that did the review, says that like Irving Kirsch, they were surprised by what they found in the drug company's unpublished data.
With the published evidence, it's significantly overestimated the effectiveness of these drugs, and it underestimated the side effects.
Well, the FDA would say that some of these unpublished studies are unpublished because there were flaws in the way the trials were conducted.
This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I doubt that they are spending $10 million per trial to come up with a poor methodology. What characterizes the unpublished is that they're negative.
McKinsey calls it the dirty little secret of pharma, wasting over half of our money each year. But even that's not the full story. These drugs have dangerous side effects that drive costs even higher, including an FDA black box warning on every drug label in the category for suicidality. We know that soldiers often don't seek treatment for years, and that many drop out because the medications just don't work or make them feel even worse. And that's a huge problem. The Army reported last year that 101 soldiers actually died from multiple drug toxicity in the very wounded warrior transition units they were being treated. Doctors are in an impossible position here. They've got over 100 medications to choose from, but no test, no direct measurement of the brain to guide which medication will work in which brain. So they're forced to rely on trial and error. We've got to find a better way.
It'd be like if we went to the internist with a fever 50 years ago. So you got a fever, we can measure that, but we have no idea what the underlying cause of that is. So we'll start you on penicillin, tetracycline, we'll go through 5 drugs. And if you live through this, this trial and error process, then you might get well. Unfortunately, that's the way psychiatry is today. So you don't know who's going to respond to which drug.
I was tired of having cardiologists stick in my face the fact that they do EKGs, all these heart tracings, which they say makes them a very quantitatively exact way of measuring things going on in the heart and with patients. And they're saying, you Dr. Richardson, you're just a witch doctor. What do you know? You give them all these medications, but you don't have anything to really base it on.
So what if doctors came up with a way to get to the right answer quicker, with less trial and error, and with fewer medications? What if that way involved a cheap, reliable neuroimaging technology we already have, EEG, combined with crowdsourced outcomes from doctors in the cloud? What if they could take advantage of the network effect, building new evidence and harnessing machine learning with every test? It would be a pretty big deal. And in fact, we did exactly that in a study at Harvard and Stanford and 10 other sites, published last year, beating the largest study of its kind by 50 to 100% on the same primary endpoints. This June, we published an even larger study of commercial health plan members that showed the same doubling or tripling of clinical improvement, along with some other surprising findings. An 87% reduction in suicidal thinking. Over 50% of the time in both studies, the report warned against medications not to use. And 10% of the time, the right medication for the patient was no medication at all. The report looks like this, and it tells the doctor a single thing. What were the outcomes reported by his peers for neurophysiologically similar patients over the range of medication that he's considering. Like when you're buying a book on Amazon.com and it says people who bought this book also like this one and this one. We're like that for your brain.
This allows us to understand a patient's unique brainwave patterns.
It's a simple office-based procedure where patients are in a relaxed but awake state. They put on what looks like a swimming cap with electrodes. It takes about 20 minutes.
So we can actually look into the brain and see what's going on, rather than just randomly trying a medication and seeing if it works.
And just like an X-ray allows doctors to see a broken bone, the EEG gives doctors a snapshot of what's happening inside a patient's brain. Doctors submit these images gathered from the EEG to a database called Peer Online. It's a shared resource developed by physicians across the country over the last 20 years.
It allows us to compare and learn which medications have been effective, as well as which medications have not been effective for physicians treating patients with similar EEG findings.
Minimizing the frustrating trial and error process.
It can be life-saving for patients because you can save years of patients suffering from incorrect, ineffective medication.
Many experts haven't heard of this or can't believe there's enough evidence. And yet, every external group that's actually read all 56 studies on peerdossier.com have found that the evidence for quantitative EEG in Peer actually exceeds the quality and amount of evidence of the trial and error therapies they're currently paying for. Like United Biosource, who cited high remission rates and superior evidence, or United Healthcare last year, who approved Peer as an emerging technology, or Milliman Global Actuaries, citing an average 75% response rate, which is 2 to 3 times better than treatment as usual. In fact, when we look at the evidence for some of the most commonly used therapies being reimbursed today, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality found most to have inadequate evidence. And Radley, in a 2006 study, ranked psychiatry as the #1 in lack of scientific support for prescribing. Childhood cancers transited the same challenge, and they went from almost certain fatality to 90% cure rates just by networking and sharing information among doctors. The leaders of psychiatry are asking for that now.
In 2001, when Frontline first reported on medicating children, the chief of ADHD research at the National Institute of Mental Health was Dr. Javier Castellanos. He acknowledged then that brain science was in its infancy.
These resting EEG asymmetries in alpha were predictive of task performance.
Dr. Castellanos now advocates doing what pediatric cancer specialists did in the 70s. Back then, childhood cancer was an almost certain death sentence.
Does the antimatter? Constant question.
The model is there. Every child with cancer in this country is part of a study. You can't get treated otherwise. Pediatric oncologists got together and said, we can't do this one by one. We have to form these associations.
By networking and comparing treatment regimens, doctors learned what worked and what did not. The system is still in place today.
We've been able to turn this around so that now it's at least 90% cure for childhood cancers. And that's a huge turnaround.
Everything that happens in the clinical treatment of kids with cancer is set up in such a way that you learn something. You learn something about what cancer is and how it should be treated. Think about the extraordinary public health impact of making that kind of principled commitment. That's what's missing. And in my view, it's scandalous.
The Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, committed the military to solve this problem earlier this year, in the same way that the military led the way that got us to space or the internet.
I talked to soldiers who told me that they felt that doctors were throwing bags of pills at them. I talked to doctors who basically said they had soldiers lined up outside their offices and they really only had an RVU of about 20 minutes to spend with each one of them. And at first I didn't believe it, but then I came to understand that it was true. Like a dummy, I thought back then the drugs that we were going ahead and prescribing those soldiers were all drugs that had been developed for the treatment of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. In my new job, I found out that that's not necessarily the case. In fact, it isn't the case at all. I've also found out that there's no drugs currently in the pipeline to take care of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, even though we've been fighting for 10 years. Every suicide that happened in the United States Army was briefed to me during that time. I had expert after expert come into my office and explain to me, and the thing I found most frustrating was that expert after expert told me something different. Jim Amos and I, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, got our doctors and a group of folks, and we had them all in a room. For 3.5 hours, they explained and argued back and forth. Jim and I got so mad, we jumped up out of our seats and said, enough is enough. They could not agree. I had 15 of the finest minds in there, and I got 16 different answers. It was the most frustrating thing I had ever done.
Why are we going to Walter Reed and Fort Belvoir? Because the military has led the way in adoption of new technologies. A model for what we're doing is the adoption of rifle scopes in combat units out there in the field. Prior to 9/11, our average regular soldiers and Marines utilized M16s with open sights. The shooting establishment continued to insist that people learn how to utilize open sights, as well as the subject matter experts. What changed, though, was the availability of a small, simple rifle scope for mounting on the M16. It was demanded by the field to increase accuracy and increase effectiveness, and was very quickly adopted throughout the military. Scopes were no longer the province of a small, specialized community of snipers. What occurred? An order of magnitude improvement in the effect, confidence, and kill ratios out there in combat. There was less error, less frustration, and we used less ammo. Instead of engaging folks at 100 yards, we were engaging at 200 to 300 yards, saving our soldiers' lives. The enemy stopped engaging in firefights with the Americans because, as a few prisoners said, they are all snipers. And what we saw was the adoption of a new technology in months, vice years. Given Secretary Panetta's recent comments about the importance of improving mental health treatment, we can't think of a technology that merits quicker adoption than peer interactive.
Big data and digital health are now a major investment target. Over $1 billion of venture capital is poured into digital health, up 73% over last year. IBM is using its Watson product to predict the best cancer treatments with WellPoint and the VA. And Watson's expected to drive $2.6 billion in revenue by 2015. Neurovigil here in La Jolla is valued at $250 million for its single-channel EEG, which helps in clinical studies. Our application is unique. It's focused on a single problem and is protected. We have 16 issued patents with 10 pending. What keeps us going in this company is that none of us have ever been in a company that had a better product, or more potential, or a more important mission. When we asked the chief of psychiatry at Walter Reed if they'd lead this effort, he had one answer: we consider it our duty. We do too. Thanks for your time.